Hello, this is PyromaniacMo coming to you live once again. Today we've got a real treat. I'm sitting down with one of my favorite guys in the industry. That would be Mr. John Tuvey. John, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's good of you to join us here. And John, who again can be reached at on Twitter, JTuvey, JTUVEY.
Correct.
And John can also be found at thehuddle.com. And John, what can fans discover if they go to the Huddle?
Well, we're in the off season, but there is no off season. So right now we're talking about coaching changes. We're talking about free agency, a lot of pre-draft stuff. We're looking at the rookie class, and then what we're probably best known for is during the season. David Dorey does his predictions and projections, and I do my start bench list. So we look at every player that has a meaningful fantasy impact each week and try and break down what they're going to do that week. So I think that's probably what the Huddle is best known for. We've also got some real good forums. A lot of involvement there. A lot of leagues born of the Huddle. In fact, there's a separate section for both leagues, born of the Huddle leagues, that I play in a couple of those as well, so that's pretty fun. So, it's a great place to get your fantasy football information year-round.
Yeah, the Huddle does a fantastic job diving into the numbers and just articles and some of the great behind-the-scenes stuff. I first became aware of you, which is, I'll probably gush a little bit here, but hopefully none of the guys in my league are listening, because truly one of my secret weapons, I think, is hearing you on Fantasy Football Weekly, the radio show. And besides some great ABBA covers, explain to our fans what the Fantasy Football Weekly radio show is, how long it's been around, what you guys do.
We believe it is the longest running fantasy football radio show. We just celebrated our 20th season last year. Paul Charchian, one of the founders of Fanball, where I got my start in the industry, has been the host for, I believe, 17 of the years, and he was a co-host before that. I've been a co-host for the last 10 years, so I've been involved with the program for more than half of the show. But during the season, we break down, again, every meaningful fantasy player. We break down each game from a fantasy standpoint. As you mentioned, we've got some long-running bits. Take a Chance on Me, where we each pick a quarterback, a running back, and a wide receiver that are maybe a little below the radar that week, and we introduce the segment with, for many years, it was just the ABBA song. And then I found one cover by Erasure, and then I started going crazy, and now we have a different cover version every week, and we found some absolutely fantastic and some really bad cover versions. That my favorite is to one of the weeks that I'm off to stick the guys with the Chipmunk version. Unfortunately, I mistimed it last year, and I ended up listening to the Chipmunk version, so I really have to be careful with that. But Charch is the host, and then myself and Christian Peterson from LeagueSafe and Matt Harrison from LeagueSafe, we are on a rotating cycle. So let's see, we've got Take a Chance, and we've got 5 Tough Questions, where we talk about 5 popular or controversial topics within fantasy football, and we try and guess what Charch is going to say. We do a preseason show where we go for another 3 hours after the radio show. We do it live at a sports bar, and then afterwards we do what's called Fantasy Football Training Camp, and we get about 200 people to come out and watch us talk about fantasy football, which is pretty crazy. We do a couple live shows at the Minnesota State Fair, with a couple of real popular segments where we have people actually come up and live mock draft, and then we put the mock in the mock draft and get to mock their picks and what they're wearing and what they're eating. And we ask people to bring us food, because that's what the Minnesota State Fair is known for. And I think one of our favorite segments there is it's called the Reach Around, which really sounds naughty, but all it means is who's a guy that you'd reach for in the second round that maybe has an ADP in the third round or later. So when we're going well, it's like three guys sitting around at a bar talking fantasy football. And I think when it was Church and Bo Mitchell and I for a long stretch of time, because we worked together and had spent so much time together, we really had it like that. And now we're getting there with Christian and Matt, even though Matt, I think, is only in his second year of hosting the show. But you bring some stats to the table, and then you talk about the things that fantasy football players want to hear. And I think what really speaks to us and tells us we're doing something right is that not only do we have a really high rating on iTunes, but we have people that call in, and I think we have 6 lines for the show, and we have people call in from Boston, from Michigan, from Alaska, and can you keep me on? I want to listen to the show. They don't want to hang up and listen, even though you can find us on iTunes, you can find the podcast on iHeartRadio. I think we're live on iHeartRadio, but locally, Charge is kind of a fantasy football institution, and the rest of us are happy to be along for the ride.
Yeah, Matt Harrison was good enough to sit down with me and chat football, do one of these little interviews. I think I love it. It is just fantastic. And, you mentioned the ABBA covers, which are quite good. But really, I love the piece, Take a Chance on Me. I think people forget a lot of times, fantasy football is a four-legged table. Everybody just focuses on the draft. But, a season isn't won or lost on the draft. There's trading, who you're going to start, and then the waiver wire. So I've been able to find some really great picks on the Take a Chance on Me. And there's some other bits that you guys do where you'll try to keep people aware of guys maybe 2 weeks in advance that might be available.
Premature speculation, that one is called. And you try and maybe a guy's going on bye, or a guy's hurt and not coming back for a couple weeks, but if you have an extra roster spot, here's a guy that you can pick up 2 weeks before the rush really comes, before maybe there's 6 kickers all going on by. Here's a guy you can stash, so you don't have to fight that crowd, or all of the elite tight ends are going to be on bye a certain week, or this guy's got a great matchup and he's not on any rosters right now. So that's another bit that I think we've added in the last 2 or 3 years, that like you said, it's not just drafting a team and then sitting back and letting everything play out. You got to stay on top of things. So and the Take a Chance on Me bit is a lot of fun. Last year, I happened to my Take a Chance on Me receiver one week was Marvin Jones, the week that he scored 3 touchdowns. So that that kind of goes down in history as you nailed that one. That gives you a little cred for what's the next one you can come up with. And I know Christian had Miles Austin before he broke big. I know there was somebody last week or last year that he nailed. We do have it's swinging for the fences, and it's kind of like you look at it. I think probably Adam Dunn would be the baseball qualification. We're going to strike out. There's no question. We're going to swing and miss quite a few times, but there's a few long balls we're going to hit, and hopefully with guys on base, we'll help you out.
Yeah, it's I can't recommend Fantasy Football Weekly enough. It's fantastic. I just love what you guys do there. And like I said, also at John or J Tuvey, JTUVEY. I'm PyromaniacMo, PYROMANIACMO. And then of course the Huddle.com. But I was just wondering, we try to pull back the curtain for our viewers, our listeners, and give them some other resources. What's a place that you go personally to uncover some gems or some stats?
One thing that the Huddle is kind of old school, and there's a lot of guys doing a lot of the metrics, a lot of the numbers, and even though I'm kind of it was my understanding there would be no math kind of guy. Guys at Football Outsiders is a place I go to. Pro Football Focus obviously does a lot of great stuff, but RotoViz and NumberFire are a couple of the places that they really do a nice job with not just laying out these numbers, but they kind of shine a light that maybe you wouldn't otherwise look, and so they're a great read. They make the numbers understandable for a guy like me that maybe math wasn't my strongest suit. I'm more of the kind of the old school scout versus the Moneyball kind of thing. But some of the stuff they come up with is fun to kind of take a look and oh, so maybe this guy, I'll dig a little bit deeper. It's kind of like the combine versus scouting the film. I'm probably more of a film, a watch the game kind of guy, but there might be something that happens that these guys at RotoViz and Numberfire, shine the light on that, maybe I need to look at it a second time. So I think those are a good resource. Another place that I found, and really through probably Twitter and social media, but there's so many good fan sites for each team, and you can find one or two or more really good analysts and writers at each team site. And the one that really jumped out at me recently was I was doing some research on the coaching changes piece that I wrote on Dirk Cotter and what he might mean. And I found a piece written by a guy named Arif Hassan, who was a Vikings fan writer, and he had this ginormous breakdown of what a Dirk Cotter offense when he was with the Falcons could potentially do against the Vikings, and what his analysis was there. Just it was fantastic. It was in depth, and I looked him up, found him on Twitter. I follow him now, and have a chance to read a lot more analysis, and that's stuff that you can grab and use elsewhere. Obviously I didn't use it for the Vikings-Falcons game, but I used it in, okay, what's Dirk Cotter going to do with what he's got working now in Jacksonville? So there's a lot of good writers. It's tough, especially in season. I'm sure you know this. You're so focused on what you're doing that you really don't have a lot of time to read other people. But in the off season, I really try and take advantage of a lot of stuff that other people have going on. And you find two or three guys that I'm going to go out of my way to take a look at what John Moore is writing, because he writes some good stuff. So those are a few of the guys, and I'm sure there's a lot more that I've used once or twice or many times. Like I said, it's an industry that's full of a lot of great writers, and you just kind of got to stumble across them. And Twitter and social media is a great place to do that.
Yeah, it's just an ever-growing industry, and so sometimes it's hard to find the real gems. But like you say, Pro Football Focus, boy, the way they rate the players and do elusiveness ratings for running backs and ranking the defensive backs, I use that to kind of check my wide receiver starts. We just sat down with JJ Zachariason from Numberfire. They're another good one, so
Absolutely, yep.
I like those sites as well. We had a heck of a season and even a heck of an off season thus far, but now that we've had some time to sort of put it in perspective, give me one thing that really stood out to you from this last year, fantasy football wise. What was your big takeaway from the season?
Well, I think the biggest one is a guy, I'm a Vikings fan, and I tried not to play the fan card, and I made it through my first 9 drafts without playing the fan card, and then I had the first overall pick in my 10th one. I said, well, here's my chance. I'll take Adrian Peterson first. What could possibly go wrong? So it's kind of you have to expect the unexpected, because you just never know what could happen next. I mean, the things we saw with Ray Rice and Adrian Peterson and Greg Hardy off the field, and how's that going to play into what happens this year? And fortunately, I guess the hallmark of my teams is that they tend to be deeper, and so there are a lot of coaching decisions to be made, and covering for Adrian Peterson, while not easy, is doable. So maybe that reinforces my decision to go deeper rather than try and be a top-heavy team, especially in an auction. And I think the other thing that I pulled out of last year was never take a Bill Belichick or Sean Payton running back, because, again, you just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, Wild Bill, man. You never know. Jonas Gray goes off one week and ticks him off or does something, and never heard from again. He's crazy. So being that we've seen some of these off-the-field issues and some of the craziness, just the unreliability of running back, are you changing anything? Are you going to do anything different next year, draft-wise or just philosophy-wise, after what happened this year?
I'm going to avoid small backs. Small backs jumped up and bit me last year. I wasn't a big Andre Ellington fan, but I ended up with him at a real good price in an auction, and he had some DNPs that just killed me. I was points away from making the playoffs, and his DNPs absolutely killed me. Gio Bernard was another guy that killed me. So small backs. I'm not going to open the wallet on those guys. I'm going to maybe look for the bigger back, or if I do have a small back, definitely look for the handcuff, or if the handcuff's not worthy, then maybe just focus the attention elsewhere. I'll take the big boys. I'm a longtime Eddie George fan. Never had to worry about a DNP with Eddie George. He always showed up, separated shoulder, what have you. He was going to play. He was a little slow at the end, but maybe I ought to go back to that philosophy and draft the big boys.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I think Matt Harrison actually got me and another one of my Pyro brethren thinking about that, and he was talking about numbers for running backs under 6 foot and for over 6 foot, and it's quite noticeable. I think once you start diving into it, it's a tough game, and you need a big bruiser to really be successful in the long run. So another thing I'm looking at that was crazy. We just survived one of the craziest free agencies that I can remember. What about some guys that are in a new position with the fantasy impact? Like, for example, the Colts. They've got some guys they're really going to be rallying around, try to get them a ring. Frank Gore, Andre Johnson. How do you like these guys? Does this improve their draft stock, or are they just kind of over the hill and you're going to let them ride off in the sunset?
No, I tend to hang on a year too long rather than let a guy go a year too early. And I think with Frank Gore, man, the guy just keeps churning out 1,000-yard seasons, and I don't know anybody's going to push him in that role in Indy unless they draft somebody and unless they spend a first-round pick. And even if they spend a first-round pick, maybe it's Todd Gurley and they give him time to fully recuperate from the knee injury. But I think there's real opportunity for Gore in Indy. You saw what Dan Herron, who really brings nothing special to the table, he had a decent run there. And as far as Andre Johnson, I think he helps from the standpoint that you saw T.Y. Hilton get absolutely taken out of a couple games. I mean, they could focus on him, let your Hakeem Nicks, Reggie Wayne on the downslope of his career, kind of let them go. I think Andre Johnson takes that away from him. So rather than maybe take a big bite out of T.Y. Hilton's numbers, he's going to bring a little more something to the table. The key there is that how much is Pep Hamilton going to run? He unleashed Andrew Luck last year. That was a little bit surprising. Will he throw that much again this year? If he doesn't, it's a big boon for Gore. I think he's probably a lot closer to the last year than he was the previous years where he was real run heavy and he lets Luck throw, and why wouldn't you? So, Johnson, I don't know that his numbers tail off that dramatically from what he's been bringing in Houston. Now, he was probably a little overrated in Houston because he'd never get the touchdowns he needed. He had the catches and the yardage. Maybe the touchdowns stay the same, the yardage is a little different, but from where I've seen him ADP wise, I think he's going to be a helper. And I think Gore, he's easy to forget about as an over the hill guy that has had his last 1,000-yard season. For what that's going to cost me, I'll take a swing on him squeezing one more 1,200-yard, 8 to 10 touchdown season out of him.
Yeah, situationally, I like it. And like you said, I think Pep, he wants to run, and I think Frank Gore could be had for a nice price. Some other of the just the crazier teams, the Bills, my goodness, they've got some weapons, I guess arguably, but McCoy, Harvin, a crazy quarterback situation. They got a tight end. Do you like the Bills? Do you like what Rex is doing, or are you shying away?
I'll shy away from the passing game because I just don't know what they have, what they bring to the table at quarterback. But LaShawn McCoy in a ground and pound, I like that. It takes a bite out of what Fred Jackson brings to the table, but there's going to be enough carries to go around. I think I like LaShawn in that role. The rest of it, including Sammy Watkins, man, Castle's going to be okay, but I think it's a ground and pound, so it works out real well for LaShawn. He'd be the one I'd be bullish on out of that offense. The rest of that offense, I think those guys will probably end up being a little overpriced.
Yeah, I think so as well. I'm always a little skeptical of McCoy, and we mentioned Pro Football Focus. They've got him an elusiveness rating of 17th ranked running back, and I think that's part of the reason Chip sent him packing, because he just was dancing around too much, wasn't going north and south. So I'm a little skeptical of McCoy. What about what about the Eagles? Where he's coming from? Murray.
That's going to be a real interesting situation because I think Chip firmly believes it's not the players, it's the system. But fantasy wise, you don't draft the system, so you got to figure out who's going to be the helpers in that system. I really liked Zach Ertz last year. A
Yeah.
little bit underused. I'd like to see him used a little bit more. I don't know for sure if that's going to happen because I think Jordan Matthews, they're really doing what they can to keep him in the slot. Miles Austin might be a value guy, and I guess if Sam Bradford can stay healthy, I don't want him as my number one quarterback, but any quarterback that's going to be, I mean, if Mark Sanchez can have fantasy value, just about anybody can do it. And Bradford's
Yeah.
got the talent. So if they find a way to keep him healthy in that offense, I think he'll be real interesting. I'm not excited at all about the running backs just because I think DeMarco Murray won't get the touches. Ryan Matthews won't get nearly enough touches, and there's still going to be a spot for Sproles. So
Yep.
based on where they'll probably go name value wise, I think you're probably going to overpay. Team wise, and win wise, they're going to be, they may be moving towards Patriots territory because Patriots every year are top 5 rushing teams, usually top 3 rushing team, but they do it with 3 or 4 different guys. The Eagles may be headed in that same direction. You can't count on, you couldn't really count on McCoy last year. He was good, but not what you paid for him. Murray won't be what you pay for him this year. There's no way Matthews gets there, and Sproles is kind of the odd man out. So it's the sum of the parts is going to be pretty good, but fantasy wise, I think there's a lot of overpriced talent there.
Yeah, I concur. Even though I think Ertz could be one of the better values for tight end come draft day. Boy, he lit it up. I can't remember which week it was, but he really showed his colors when they were letting him have the ball late in the season. I liked Ertz quite a bit. Um, Another big one, the Saints. My God, sometimes it looks like they were just, I don't know, a rudderless ship, and maybe there's a game plan there. But let's start with the impact of Jimmy Graham and the hole that he leaves there. What do you make of this?
Well, Josh Hill's the guy that they're talking up as the guy to replace him, and he's not necessarily going to step into Jimmy Graham numbers, but as long as he stays about where he is on the radar and only a handful of people are talking about him, I think that's a good thing. He has the real possibility to be overhyped by the time the draft comes out. If he's in the top 6 tight ends, probably, I think that's going to be too high. He's the guy you take after, Gronk goes first, and then probably the next 3, 4, 5 guys go, and then if you wait until round 7 or 8, he's probably the guy that you reach for, and then you'll get value for him. Otherwise, you're probably chasing more than what's going to be offered there. That whole passing game, it was, even for all the points that the Saints put up, the only fantasy guys you really wanted were Breeze and Graham because you never knew how the backfield was going to splinter, how the catches were going to splinter. One week it was Colston, the next week it was Stills, the next week it was Cooks. So now that they've kind of pared that down a little bit with Stills and Cooks, there's some value there, but they're only going to be they're going to return about value. I don't know that you're going to be getting any of them at a bargain. And Breeze, I'm not sure that he's an elite quarterback anymore. He's probably in that second group of quarterbacks because they do want to run more. But then is it going to be Ingram? Is it going to be Kyrie Robinson? Is it going to be C.J. Spiller? They're finding spots to use all these guys. It's so many cooks that again, it goes back to Breeze is a guy you want, and probably the kicker, and everybody else is probably a little bit overvalued.
Yeah, and I am kind of liking Cooks. Colston's getting old. I think he might take a big step forward. We shall see. He's really the main one there. They've got Toon, I suppose, but maybe they'll get someone else in the draft. And one thing I'm kind of eyeing, I don't know what role exactly Spiller's going to have, but I like Mark Ingram, and I like him more now that they've got the center, Unger. He did a heck of a job, and I was looking at the numbers. When he was on the field with Seattle, Lynch was markedly better, and when he was off the field, I mean, the center's a main cog of the offensive line. They're calling out blocking. It's really the heart of the offense, and he's going to be a big impact, I think, for Ingram. What do you think?
I don't disagree, but go back to what I said earlier. As much as I like Ingram and the potential there, and especially you hit on one of my favorite topics, the offensive line, and I think Unger's one of the better centers in the game, and to get him tells me they're going to run the ball more. Are they going to run it enough, and what role is Spiller going to have, and are they going to still try and work Kyrie Robinson into the mix? So, if you were to tell me, that stretch like Ingram had last year, where it was him and really no one else, and he was a dominant fantasy back. He was clearly a top 10 fantasy back. If you told me he's going to get those carries, I'm right on board with you. But something in the back of my mind is just telling me Sean Payton's just waiting to pull that lever on me, and I don't want to be anywhere near the noose when he does.
Yeah, it can. It's a gamble.
Yep.
Even Cooks makes me nervous. Even though that Stills is now in Miami, I think. I liked what I saw, but I just don't know what exactly they're doing. It's a gamble down there. And we talked about the Colts, the Bills, the Eagles, Saints. Is there any other teams that you feel either really won or lost the free agency battle?
I kind of like what the Dolphins are doing a little bit with the passing game. Ryan Tannehill's strength is not the deep ball, and so they got rid of Mike Wallace, and I think Jarvis Landry can do a little bit underneath, and Stills, he can go deep, but I think he showed he can do more than just go deep last year. So, and also Jordan Cameron, I think they gave Tannehill some intermediate targets that he'll be able to work with, and be curious to see if they're sticking with their running backs as they are, or if they're going to go get somebody in the draft, because you go back to, you talked about Unger. That's an offensive line that they had started 5 new guys last year. Now they're kind of gelling together a little bit. I know they lost one of their guards, but they got one of my favorite rookies from last year, and Billy Turner stepping in probably to that spot. So that line coming together, I think they're going to be able to run the ball a little bit better, and then playing to Tannehill's strengths, let him roll out a little bit more, let him throw the intermediate, don't force Mike Wallace into that mix and have him complain about it. There's some interesting things going on in Miami.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what they do in the draft. And I like Tannehill going forward. I liked him last year. He had a late start, kind of, but I liked what he was doing. So we've got a lot of player changes throughout the league. What about some coaching changes that you think might be impactful to fantasy? Like Chan Gailey going to the Jets. There's a plethora of under the radar guys for the Jets now. What do you think? How do you think Chan will impact New York?
That's one of the more intriguing ones to me as well, and you hit on something that, again, has been one of my huge projects this offseason. I think I've written about 15,000 words on coaching changes and what they mean fantasy-wise, and it's kind of an unexplored aspect. But with Chan in that offense, I think he can make Geno Smith, especially with those targets, definitely viable in a 2-quarterback system. And if they end up with Marcus Mariota, I think there's some real upside, because Chan Gailey made Tyler Thigpen a reasonably competent quarterback. He knows how to tailor his offense to what he's got. And so with Marshall, with Decker, with Jason Amaro, whether they go with Chris Ivory or they end up with a back in the draft, there's a lot of potential there for what that offense can do. And again, Chan Gailey knows how to fit what he's doing to the talent he's got, whether it's Geno Smith, whether it's Mariota, but he's got targets to work with. They can run the ball, whether they end up with a back out of this draft to complement Ivory, replace Ivory. There's some positive things going on for the Jets as well.
Yeah, I like the Jets. I think they've got some decent under the radar guys. Certainly, Marshall, not that he's under the radar, but Ivory. I think Charge calls him Beast East.
Yep.
Yeah, he's like a little mini Marshall or Marshawn. But Powell, I've been hearing a lot of stuff about him, and honestly, one of the bigger things, I think Decker, he's going to be a great number 2. I don't think he could really fill the role as a number 1, but with Marshall there, it'll take some heat off him. They've got Amaro. I'm kind of liking the Jets. Some good value there, and I think a lot of people will be sleeping on him come draft day.
And they're all receivers with size and receivers that can get open. Like you saw with Marshall in the offense they had in Chicago. They don't need to go deep and get separation. They've got the size to get separation in the short game. So whether you've got Mariota or Geno Smith rolling out, you're not forcing them to make throws that they're uncomfortable making. Plus, if it worked for Josh McCown. You put it up high. You've got receivers. I think Decker's 6'3", Marshall's 6'4", Jason Marl's a big receiver. Those are the kind of guys that can go up and get a ball that are going to win battles for their quarterbacks and make Geno or Marcus Mariota look a lot better than they'd be in another system.
Yeah, and like you say, the coaching changes are fantastic. I know you've got a piece on the Huddle, fantasy impact of the 2015 NFL coaching changes, and we've been talking a little bit about Chan Gailey. But is there anyone else, after doing the piece and diving into the numbers, anyone else that you are interested in to see what happens?
We talked a little bit about Dirk Cotter earlier, and I think if he ends up with Jameis Winston throwing to Mike Evans, throwing to VJax, throwing to Austin Seferian-Jenkins, that's going to be a real intriguing offense. Bill Musgrave's a run-heavy guy. He doesn't have a tremendous track record of success, but he does have a track record of being run-heavy. If they go with the roster that they have right now, that means Latavius Murray is going to be the go-to guy, and I think that skyrockets his fantasy value. Mark Trestman taking over in Baltimore. You saw what Matt Forte did as a receiver. Justin Forsette's never been asked to be as big a receiver as Forte was, but I think he fills that role, especially since Trestman needs to adapt his offense to be more Raven-like and run the ball more and get the ball to his backs and Forsett in that role. The other role that really jumped out at me was right now the feature back in Kyle Shanahan's zone offense is Devontae Freeman. And unless they draft somebody, that's an offense that he ran at Florida State with some degree of success. He's not ideal, but you look at some of the backs that have had success in Kyle Shanahan offenses. Steve Slayton. Yeah. I mean, what does Slayton have that Devontae Freeman doesn't? That's going to be maybe a cheap source of 1,200 yards and 8 to 10 touchdowns.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about Devontae last year. They were still kind of figuring things out with Old Man Jackson, and they had a few cooks in the kitchen there. But he's going to be interesting with Shanahan, like you say. It's a great piece that you have up. I did just tweet it out again. I'm PyromaniacMo, the piece from thehuddle.com, Fantasy Impact of the 2015 NFL Coaching Changes. Is just fantastic. Last bit on the coaching changes. What about Kubiak in Denver? How do you think that's going to fit with with Big John Elway there? Is he just Kubiak sort of a yes man? Is he going to get to implement what he wants, or is he going to run Peyton Manning style offense? What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's a real nice blend for the end of Peyton Manning's career, which we kind of saw some hints of it down the stretch with the thigh injury and how much they ran the ball. And you go back to when Elway won his 2 Super Bowls in Denver, they did it on the strength more of Terrell Davis. Elway wasn't required to carry as much of the load, and it wouldn't surprise me to see Denver take a similar approach to the point that I don't know that Peyton's a top 5 fantasy quarterback. I don't think he's going to throw as much. I think it's going to be C.J. Anderson probably, maybe some Monte Ball, but the one guy out of that passing game I do like is Owen Daniels. I mean, yeah, he's the prototypical Gary Kubiak tight end, and I know that they've got some other guys on that roster, and they may end up drafting, where they're situated. Max Williams might fall right into their wheelhouse, but Owen Daniels just gets it done for Gary Kubiak, and again, you're not going to have to spend, treat him as a top 5, even maybe a top 10 tight end, but as long as he stays healthy, and that's kind of been the question with him. If he can stay on the field for 15 games, he's probably going to give you 8 touchdowns, and at the tight end position, that's probably better than trying to chase something as you're streaming.
Yeah, I was talking about Owen Daniels with JJ Zacharyson from Numberfire. I like the fact that he's taken him. This is the 3rd team now that the two have been on together. My only concern is Virgil Green. Do you know much about him? Do you think he's going to be eating his way into the time? Are they going to be splitting time? Virgil, I've heard a lot of stuff, a lot of potential coming out there, but I do like Owen. How do you think that's going to shake out?
The interesting thing is that Virgil Green was kind of treated as an athletic pass catching tight end when he came out, and when he went to Denver, he ended up being their blocking tight end. So he does kind of have the combo skills that Kubiak looks for. And if Daniels is more mentor than actual player this year, Green's probably the guy that's going to benefit from that. I still think they squeeze one more year of play out of Daniels before he hobbles off into the sunset, probably becomes Gary Kubiak's lifetime tight ends coach, and Green becomes a go-to guy for them. But yeah, the potential is there. I don't, if you have a huge 20 plus man roster, he's probably a tight end that you handcuff as your third tight end, but I don't know a lot of leagues that you're going to carry that. Although you keep an eye on Owen Daniels' injury situation, and the first sign of a pulled hamstring or anything from Owen Daniels, Virgil Green's going to be the guy to grab.
Yeah, yeah, and one other guy I want to ask you about in Denver. I know we've only got about 5 minutes left. I tell you, John, I'd like to crack a beer and talk about this with you all night. But what about Cody Latimer? I was really excited about him last year. Just didn't seem to fit into the system. They had a lot of guys. I've been hearing talk. Emmanuel Sanders role a little bit. Do you like Latimer? Is he going to take a big step up? Is he a sleeper for this year?
He was a popular dynasty pick last year for a lot of reasons, and I think if we had the old Peyton Manning, you'd love to have that third receiver in Denver. But I think you've got kind of the fading Peyton Manning, so it's going to be a lot more running, a lot less throwing. You've got two borderline elite receivers to feed and Gary Kubiak's tight end. So it's going to be real tough for Latimer to squeeze fantasy value out of his role this year. Not saying he can't do it, but the way that the Broncos are shaping up, to me, it doesn't look like, as long as the hype train is still rolling pretty good, he's probably going to be overvalued.
What about some other, wide receiver battles? Maybe not for the starting role, but Cincinnati. You've got your Marvin Jones. I think he was the guy that got you the pick of the year last year, was it not? And he's battling Sanu. Chicago, we got Wilson and Royal. We talked a little bit about Andre Johnson, how that may even impact Moncrief. But what about some of these wide receiver number twos? Is there anyone that you like out of the guys I mentioned, or someone else altogether?
One guy that you didn't touch on there, but you did mention in the pre-show notes was Cecil Shorts in Houston, because I think that is a definite opportunity. I like Hopkins stepping into that number one role. I think Shorts can be a very solid number two. The things that scare me about both the Cincy and the Chicago situations is that you have coaches and or offensive coordinators in Hugh Jackson and John Fox that love to run the ball. So that number two receiver job isn't going to be quite as prolific. And then you've got quarterbacks with a little bit of issues in Dalton and Cutler. So, and you've also got elite number ones in Alshon Jeffrey, who I think has the potential to be elite, and AJ Green. So number ones are going to gobble up a good chunk. Number twos, they probably end up not necessarily splitting, but cutting into each other enough that I don't know that there's a guy with tremendous fantasy upside, barring one of them getting hurt. So of that group, I think Cecil Shorts, and then I think Andre Johnson in Indy. I think he ends up sticking around for at least one more year. Best quarterback he's ever had a chance to play with, and if they let Luck throw as much as he did in the past, or at least last year, real opportunity for him as well.
Yeah, I like the Andre Johnson scenario. My heart goes out to all the Moncrief dynasty owners.
Or the Durant Carter owners, too. The people that jumped on Durant Carter as, oh, man, this guy's got a line. He's going to go to a great quarterback, and now he could end up being the fourth or fifth guy in that offense.
Yeah, it's a good plan, or it's a good problem to have, I suppose, if you're a quarterback there. But some fantasy spurs in the saddle there. Last question, since you are a Minnesotan, a guy from the Vikings territory, what do you know about what's going on there? They've got a ton of weapons: Charles Johnson, Mike Wallace, Jarius Wright, Patterson. Tell me a little bit about Minnesota and how you think they're going to fare this year.
I think they're going to transition to Teddy Bridgewater's team, whether they have AP on the roster or not. And I think they'd like to keep him. They aren't going to give him away. I don't know that Peterson wants to stick around. But it's becoming Bridgewater's team. I really would love to see Adrian Peterson 1 year in a Norv Turner offense and see what would happen, but I don't know that we're going to get that. The other guy I'd like to see in a Norv Turner offense is Kyle Rudolph for a full healthy year. I was really bullish on him last year. The injury jumped up and bit him, really took most of his season away. So I like his chances this year, and that's going to bite into what the receivers do. And again, do they draft one of those elite three at 11 to go with Charles Johnson, Mike Wallace, Jarius Wright playing out of the slot? Patterson's the one that I don't think they're quite ready to give up on him yet. But if it, especially if they add Cooper or White or Parker to that mix, they're going to be enough touches where they really force themselves to get him the ball, or is he a glorified return man? So it's going to be interesting to see how that receiver situation shakes down. If I had to grab one right now, it would probably be Charles Johnson. I think he's got a comfort level with Bridgewater, but I think Wallace can bring a lot to the table, and obviously Rudolph is going to be a nice guy to have in that offense. And then if they end up trading Adrian Peterson, I think McKinnon's going to end up being the third down back, and they're probably going to draft either a feature back to develop or a bigger back to be there between the tackles, and McKinnon will be the third down guy. I don't think Asiata, as much success as he had last year, I don't think that he's their long-term answer. So it all stems towards becoming Teddy Bridgewater's team as they're looking to move into that new stadium in a couple years.
Was Bridgewater the best rookie quarterback in the draft last year, in your opinion?
He was, and the fact that he dropped, it's still, it can't all be based on the pro day. There had to be something else, or maybe it was just that reactionary, well, they didn't take him, there must be a reason, so I'm not going to take him kind of thing. But kudos to Rick Spielman for trading back up into the draft and getting a guy that certainly looks like he has the it factor, not just not just the arm and not just the mobility and not just the physical traits of a quarterback, but that it factor that a guy like Christian Ponder, his last first-round quarterback, was unable to come up with.
And last question for you, I got to ask about AP. Is he going to be suiting up for the Vikings this year, in your opinion?
Somebody's got to come with a legit offer. Otherwise, I think they don't pull the trigger. They don't give him away. I think there's got to be a 2-1 next year, or a 1 and a player, or something like that. I know he doesn't want to be here, but you don't give away an asset like that, because then it looks like the inmates are running the asylum. So his wife may not want to be here, his agent may not want to be here, but I think you put Adrian Peterson on the field and point him in the right direction, and he's going to do damage no matter what uniform he's wearing. And man, like I said, I'd love to see what AP can do with a full year in a Norv Turner offense, because I think that would justify that #1 overall pick I spent on him last year.
Yeah, reports are he's mad enough and ripped enough to rip kegs in half. So I want to see him on the field. John, I can't thank you enough for sitting down with me. It's really been enjoyable. I've enjoyed it personally, and I know our fans have as well.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Anytime you want to talk football, it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Again, that was John Tuvey. You can find him at the Huddle, huddle.com. You can tune in every week during the football season for Fantasy Football Weekly, the radio show. Either you can find it on iTunes or iHeartRadio. And he can be found on Twitter at JTuvey, JTUVEY. And again, I just tweeted out to my followers a link to his 2015 coaching changes. I'm PyromaniacMo at PYROMANIACMO. And as always, you can find me on pyromaniac.com. You can tune in weekly and hear the boys talk it up and drink a few brews. And until then, keep up the fantasy goo.